Commander Tala Windhart stood before the massive viewing window of Meridian Station and watched the distant stars twinkle in the darkness of space. The crystalline formations on her body glowed softly blue as she processed the morning reports from across the research colony. 3,000 peaceful beings called this place home. Floating safely in orbit around the gas giant Vos 7, the Quellians like herself provided logical leadership, while the plant-like Verdani handled most of the scientific research and the ethereal Luminar managed communications with the outside galaxy. It was supposed to be another quiet day of research and discovery until Navigator Shine Brightstar burst into the command center with terror written across her glowing features. Her normally calm voice shook as she spoke to the commander about what their long-range sensors had detected at the edge of the system. A massive fleet was approaching Meridian Station and the signatures matched those of the dreaded Krellian. Raiders, everyone in the command center fell silent when they heard the name. The Krellians were savage warriors who had been sweeping across the outer rim sectors for months, conquering peaceful worlds and enslaving or eliminating entire populations. Their brutal reputation preceded them wherever they went, and no civilized species had successfully resisted their advances. The raiders used overwhelming force and showed no mercy to those who opposed them. Commander Windhart quickly pulled up the sensor data and felt her crystalline heart sink as she saw the size of the approaching armada. Over 200 ships of various sizes were heading directly toward their station and would arrive in less than 48 hours. The defensive capabilities of Meridian Station were minimal at best, designed only for deflecting asteroids and space debris rather than fighting off a military assault. Dr. Moss Greenbark entered the command center. Just as the gravity of their situation became clear to everyone present, the elderly Verdani scientist had spent decades studying quantum communications and immediately understood what needed to be done. His bark-like skin rustled as he spoke about sending a distress signal across all known frequencies in hopes that some nearby military patrol might be able to respond in time to help them, the commander authorized the emergency broadcast even though she knew their chances were slim. The nearest galactic defense force patrol was over 3 weeks away from their current position, and the Krellian fleet would have finished its work long before any official help could arrive. Still, they had to try something rather than simply wait for their inevitable destruction. Navigator Brightstar worked frantically at her communications console, broadcasting their desperate plea for assistance on every frequency she could access. The message was simple but urgent, explaining their situation and begging for immediate military assistance from any friendly forces in the area. She repeated the transmission over and over, hoping that someone somewhere might be listening and able to help. Hours passed with no response to their distress calls, and the Krellian fleet continued its steady approach toward Meridian Station. The colonists began preparing for the worst, gathering their families and trying to find secure locations within the station where they might have a chance of survival. The peaceful beings had never faced anything like this before, and fear spread through every corridor and chamber. Dr. Greenbark continued monitoring the communications array while also helping coordinate evacuation procedures for the most vulnerable colonists. The Verdani scientist refused to give up hope even as their situation grew more desperate with each passing hour. He adjusted the signal strength and tried different transmission methods, hoping to reach someone who might be able to provide assistance. Commander Windhart called an emergency meeting with her senior staff to discuss their limited options for defense. The station had some basic shield generators and a few mining lasers that could potentially be weaponized, but nothing that would make any real difference against a full Krellian assault fleet. They could try to evacuate using their small transport vessels, but most of the colonists would be left behind to face the raiders alone. The crystalline commander made the difficult decision to prepare for a fighting retreat, while continuing to broadcast their distress signal. Even if they could not save everyone, they might be able to protect some of the colonists and preserve the valuable research data they had collected over the years. It was not much of a plan, but it was better than surrendering without any resistance at all. As the hours continued to pass, Navigator Brightstar noticed something strange appearing on her long-range communication sensors. A faint signal was coming from the direction of the infamous Deathworld sector, a region of space that most civilized species avoided completely. The area was rumored to be home to the legendary humans, beings who had evolved on a world so hostile that it would kill most other species within hours of exposure. The signal was weak and distorted, but it appeared to be some kind of monitoring station responding to their distress call. Brightstar worked to clean up the transmission while trying to establish a clearer connection with whoever was attempting to contact them. The static gradually cleared enough for her to make out parts of what was being transmitted back to their station. Dr. Greenbark and Commander Windhart gathered around the communications console as Navigator Brightstar continued working to improve the signal clarity. They could hear fragments of a voice speaking in the ancient trade language that most species used for official communications between different worlds. The voice sounded rough and unfamiliar, unlike anything they had heard before from other galactic civilizations. The Krellian fleet appeared on their short-range sensors as Navigator Brightstar finally managed to clean up the incoming transmission enough to understand what was being said. Captain Razor Bloodfang himself was leading the assault force, and his ships were already beginning to deploy in attack formations around Meridian Station. The time for preparation was over, and their destruction seemed inevitable. Then the voice from the Deathworld sector came through clearly for the first time, and everyone in the command center froze as they heard the words that would change everything. The gruff voice speaking in the ancient trade language identified itself as Admiral Kane of the Terran fleet and delivered a message that sent chills through every being present. The humans had heard their call for help, and assistance was already on the way. Commander Windhart stared at the communications console in disbelief as the implications of what they had just heard began to sink in. The legendary Deathworlders were real, and they were coming to help defend Meridian Station against the Krellian raiders. Stories about humans had spread throughout the galaxy for generations, but most beings considered them to be myths or exaggerated tales meant to frighten children. The final part of Admiral Kane's transmission contained a simple but powerful command that would be remembered for generations to come. The human fleet commander told them to hold their position and defend themselves as best they could until the Terran ships arrived. Help was coming from the Deathworld, and nothing would stop them from reaching Meridian Station in time to face the Krellian threat. Navigator Brightstar confirmed that the transmission was authentic and had definitely originated from the Deathworld sector before the signal faded back into static. The three senior officers looked at each other with a mixture of hope and terror as they realized that their desperate plea for help had been answered by the most feared and respected warriors in the known galaxy. The humans were coming to Meridian Station. Captain Razor Bloodfang stood on the bridge of his massive flagship and watched the peaceful research station grow larger on his main viewing screen. The Krellian raider leader had conquered dozens of worlds across the Outer Rim and expected this assault to be just as easy as all the others. His fleet of over 200 warships surrounded Meridian Station like hungry predators preparing to devour helpless prey, and victory seemed certain within the next few hours. The scarred captain had built his reputation on brutal efficiency and overwhelming force, crushing any resistance before it could organize into a meaningful threat. His warriors were eager for battle and the spoils that would follow their inevitable victory over the peaceful colonists. The Krellians had perfected the art of conquest through fear and violence, leaving no survivors who might warn other worlds about their approach. However, something was bothering Captain Bloodfang as he reviewed the intelligence reports from his advanced scouts. They had intercepted communications between the station and some unknown force in the Deathworld sector, and the name mentioned in those transmissions sent ripples of unease through even his most hardened warriors. The ancient trade language word Terran carried meanings that most modern species had forgotten, but old Krellian veterans still remembered the warnings. General Nova Steelclaw entered the bridge just as Captain Bloodfang was trying to dismiss his growing concerns about the intercepted transmissions. The female Krellian ground assault leader was known for her ruthless tactics and had personally led the destruction of 3 peaceful colonies in the past month alone. Her arrival meant that the final preparations for the assault were complete. and the attack could begin at any moment. The general reported that her invasion forces were ready to board the station once the space battle eliminated any defensive capabilities the colonists might possess. She had studied the layout of Meridian Station and identified the key locations that needed to be secured quickly to prevent any organized resistance. The plan was simple and had worked perfectly on every previous target they had attacked. Captain Bloodfang ordered his fleet to begin the final approach toward Meridian Station, while trying to push aside his nagging doubts about the mysterious response to the colonists' distress call. The Krellian raiders had faced many different species during their campaign of conquest, and none had proven capable of standing against their superior firepower and tactical expertise. Whatever force was coming to help the station would arrive. Too late to make any difference, meanwhile. Elder Vale Whisperwind had gathered the terrified colonists in the main assembly hall of Meridian Station to share ancient stories that might help them understand what was coming. The elderly Luminar historian had spent centuries collecting tales and legends from across the galaxy, including those about the mysterious beings who lived in the Deathworld sector. Her ethereal voice carried clearly through the crowded space. As she began to speak, the elder explained that humans had evolved on a world so hostile that it would kill most galactic species within hours of exposure. Their planet had massive predators, deadly weather patterns, and environmental conditions that should have made complex life impossible. Yet somehow the humans had not just survived, but thrived in circumstances that would be considered uninhabitable by every other known civilization in the galaxy. She told them about the unique way humans had developed as persistence hunters, capable of chasing their prey across vast distances until exhaustion made the kill possible. This hunting method was virtually unknown among other sapient species, who had evolved as either ambush predators or peaceful gatherers. The humans could literally run their enemies to death if necessary, never stopping until their target collapsed. From exhaustion. Elder Whisperwind continued her explanation by describing the psychological effects of growing up on such a dangerous world. Humans had learned to view impossible odds as merely inconvenient obstacles rather than insurmountable barriers to success. They approached problems with a determination that bordered on madness, refusing to accept defeat even when facing overwhelming enemy forces. This mindset made them formidable allies but absolutely terrifying enemies. The colonists listened in stunned silence as the ancient historian revealed more details about human nature and capabilities. They were the only known species that had weaponized everything from their planet, turning even their recreational activities into training for warfare. Their children played games that would be considered military exercises by most other civilizations, and their entertainment often involved simulated combat scenarios far away in the Deathworld sector. Admiral Rex Kane stood on the bridge of his flagship as the Terran fleet prepared for their fastest possible journey to Meridian Station. The battle-scarred veteran had commanded human forces for over 30 years and understood exactly what they were facing. The Krellian raiders had made a fatal mistake by attacking innocents while humans were within range to respond. Tech. Sergeant Bolt Ironhand worked frantically in the engineering sections of the human ships, pushing their faster-than-light drives beyond normal safety limits to reach the besieged station in time. The grizzled engineer had served with Admiral Kane since the early days of human expansion into space and shared his commander's absolute commitment to protecting those who could not protect themselves. The human fleet was smaller than most military formations, but built with the dense, durable materials that their harsh homeworld had taught them to value above all else. Each ship could absorb punishment that would destroy vessels from other civilizations and continue fighting until their missions were complete. The humans had learned long ago that survival often depended on simply being tougher than whatever was trying to kill them. Admiral Kane studied the tactical information about the Krellian fleet while his ships raced through space toward their destination. The enemy had superior numbers and firepower, but those advantages meant nothing if they could not break the human will to continue fighting. The Admiral had faced impossible odds before and understood that victory often belonged to whoever was willing to pay the highest price for success. Captain. Bloodfang decided to begin his assault early rather than wait for the mysterious Terran forces to arrive at Meridian Station. He had heard the old stories about Deathworlders but dismissed them as propaganda, designed to frighten weak-minded species into submission. The Krellian captain had built his reputation on crushing myths and legends, and he saw no reason why these humans should be any different from his previous victims. The first wave of Krellian fighters launched from their carriers and began their attack run toward the research station. Captain Bloodfang watched with satisfaction as his warriors moved into perfect assault formations, their weapons charging for the devastating opening strike that would cripple any defensive capabilities the colonists might have prepared. Victory was within his grasp and nothing could stop him now. Just as the Krellian fighters opened fire on the weak shields protecting Meridian Station, proximity alarms began screaming throughout the raider fleet. Something impossible had happened in the space around their formation, and Captain Bloodfang stared in disbelief at what his sensors were telling him. A single human scout ship had somehow appeared in the middle of his fleet, having traveled faster than their detection systems could track. Captain Ash Nighthawk stood calmly on the bridge of her scout ship, relentless, as Krellian fighters swarmed around her position like angry insects. The human officer had been running silent reconnaissance near the border when they intercepted the desperate distress call from Meridian Station, and she had made an immediate decision that would have been considered insane by most other species. Unable to wait for the main fleet to arrive, Nighthawk had ordered a faster-than-light microjump directly into the enemy formation. The maneuver was considered impossible by most galactic civilizations because the risk of materializing inside solid matter or miscalculating the exit point would result in instant destruction. However, humans had learned to accept impossible risks when innocent lives were at stake, and Captain Nighthawk had successfully placed her small ship exactly where she wanted it to be. The Krellian raiders now found themselves with a human warship sitting in the middle of their attack formation. Lieutenant Flint Rockslide worked at the weapons console with the calm efficiency that came from years of combat experience alongside his captain. The scarred human warrior had served on frontier patrol ships since he was barely old enough to enlist, and he understood exactly what needed to be done. The Krellians were attacking civilians, and that meant the talking was already finished before it had even begun. Captain Nighthawk opened communications with the Krellian fleet using the same ancient trade language they had heard in the original distress call. Her voice carried across the space between ships with a cold certainty that made even hardened raiders pause in their assault preparations. She did not demand surrender or issue warnings about the consequences of their actions, instead simply stating a fact that would change everything. The human captain told the Krellian forces that they were attacking civilians and that such behavior would end immediately. There was no negotiation in her voice, no hint that alternative outcomes might be possible if certain conditions were met. Lieutenant Rockslide had already locked weapons onto multiple targets while his captain spoke, and the Relentless immediately began engaging the entire Krellian fighter squadron without any further discussion. What followed next would be remembered and retold throughout the galaxy for generations to come as the moment when the legends about Deathworlders proved to be absolutely true. The small human ship moved through space like nothing the Krellians had ever encountered. Not just fast, but with an aggressive unpredictability that defied every tactical manual they had studied. It took direct hits that should have been completely crippling and continued fighting as if nothing had happened. War. Chief Scar Ironjaw watched from his command ship in growing horror as his supposedly superior fighters were systematically destroyed by beings who seemed to view impossible odds as merely inconvenient obstacles. The human vessel fought with a ferocity that reminded him of ancient predators from his homeworld, never retreating or showing any sign of fear. Despite being outnumbered by more than 50-1 when several Krellian fighters attempted to ram the human ship in desperation, expecting to at least damage it through collision, the Relentless simply rammed them back with even greater force. The human vessel seemed to be built from materials that were far denser and more durable than anything the raiders had encountered before, absorbing impacts that would have shattered their own ships into debris. Lieutenant Rockslide worked his weapon systems with deadly precision, picking off enemy fighters one by one while his captain maneuvered their ship through the chaotic battle. The humans fought like they had nothing left to lose, but with the tactical expertise of warriors who had survived losing everything before. Each shot found its target, and each maneuver placed them in position to eliminate another threat to the innocent colonists. Captain Nighthawk somehow managed to capture several Krellian pilots alive during the space battle, using precision strikes to disable their fighters rather than destroying them completely. This act of mercy in the middle of such intense combat shocked the raiders even more than the human fighting capabilities, because it demonstrated a level of control that seemed impossible under such circumstances. On Meridian Station, Dr. Willow Gentleheart found herself treating wounded Krellian prisoners that the humans had somehow managed to deliver to the station medical bay. The gentle Verdani medical officer had never seen combat injuries before, but she worked to help the captured raiders despite their earlier intention to destroy her home. The prisoners were in complete shock, babbling about demons who walked through fire and hunters who never stopped coming. The captured Krellians kept repeating stories about how the human ship had seemed to ignore damage that should have been fatal, continuing to fight even when its hull was breached and internal systems were failing. They spoke with terror about warriors who treated vacuum exposure and radiation as minor inconveniences rather than deadly threats, moving through environments that would kill most species within minutes. Dr. Gentleheart listened to these accounts, while she worked to stabilize the wounded prisoners, trying to understand how the peaceful distress call they had sent had summoned such terrifying protectors to their aid. The Krellian raiders spoke about the humans with the same fear that children might use when describing monsters from their worst nightmares. Yet these same beings had risked everything to defend complete strangers. War Chief Ironjaw sent increasingly desperate reports to Captain Bloodfang as the last of his fighter squadrons were eliminated by the single human scout ship. The Relentless had taken damage that would have destroyed any Krellian vessel multiple times over, yet it continued to function and fight with undiminished effectiveness. The human crew seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to keep fighting no matter what happened to their ship. Captain Bloodfang finally decided to end the embarrassing situation by using his flagship's main weapons to destroy the troublesome human vessel. He had lost an entire fighter wing to a single enemy ship, and his reputation would be ruined if word of this defeat spread to other raider fleets. The massive Krellian battleship began charging its primary cannons for a strike that would vaporize the Relentless completely. The human scout ship detected the weapon build-up, and Captain Nighthawk calmly prepared her crew for what appeared to be their final moments. She had accomplished her mission by delaying the Krellian assault and giving the colonists precious extra time to prepare their defenses. Lieutenant Rockslide continued working at his station, determined to inflict as much damage as possible before their ship was destroyed. Just as Captain Bloodfang prepared to fire his main weapons at the defiant human vessel, his sensor operators detected something that made his blood freeze in his veins. Dozens of new contacts were dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the star system, and their signatures matched those of the ship that had just destroyed his entire fighter wing. The main human fleet had arrived at Meridian Station. Admiral Kane's voice echoed across all communication frequencies with the cold authority of someone who had faced impossible odds countless times before and emerged victorious. The human fleet commander gave the Krellian forces exactly 30 seconds to surrender unconditionally or face complete destruction. There was no negotiation in his tone, only the promise of inevitable consequences for those who chose to continue threatening innocent civilians. Captain Bloodfang stared at his tactical displays as more and more human ships appeared throughout the system, cutting off every possible escape route with the precision of experienced hunters surrounding their prey. The Terran fleet had arrived to defend Meridian Station, and the real battle was about to begin. Admiral Rex Kane commanded the Terran 7th Fleet from the bridge of his massive battleship, indomitable as dozens of human warships, spread throughout the V7 system like a pack of predators preparing to hunt. The battle-scarred veteran had fought in more campaigns than most beings could count, and he understood exactly how to handle raiders who preyed upon innocent civilians. The humans did not arrange themselves in traditional battle formations because they were not planning a conventional military engagement. The Terran fleet deployed with the calculated precision of hunters who had studied their prey for generations, cutting off every possible escape route from the star system before the Krellians could react to their presence. Each human ship took position at critical jump points and gravitational anomalies that would prevent enemy vessels from fleeing to hyperspace, creating an inescapable trap around the raider fleet. Admiral Kane's strategy was not just military, but psychological warfare designed to break the enemy's will to fight. Captain Razor Bloodfang watched his tactical displays with growing terror as more human ships continued to appear throughout the system, materializing from faster than light travel with timing that seemed impossible to achieve. The Krellian raider leader had built his reputation on overwhelming force and brutal efficiency, but now he found himself surrounded by warriors who appeared to be even more dangerous than his own troops. The legends about Deathworlders were proving to be absolutely true. Colonel Storm Blackwater prepared her marine assault teams aboard the human troop transports, knowing that the space battle would only be the beginning of their mission to protect Meridian Station. The veteran officer had led boarding actions against pirate vessels throughout the frontier sectors, and she understood that the Krellians would fight desperately once they realized they had no chance of escape. Her warriors were ready for close combat in any environment the enemy might use against them. The Krellian fleet tried to maintain some semblance of battle formation as Admiral Kane's ships moved into attack positions. The panic was already spreading through their ranks as individual captains realized the hopelessness of their situation. Several raider vessels attempted to break through the human perimeter, only to discover that the Terran ships were faster and more maneuverable than anything they had encountered before. The humans pursued fleeing enemies with the relentless persistence of natural hunters. Ambassador Calm Peaceweaver had arrived at Meridian Station aboard one of the last civilian transports to reach the system before the fighting began, and she now found herself in the middle of what promised to be one of the most significant military engagements in recent galactic history. The experienced Krellian diplomat had spent decades negotiating peaceful solutions to conflicts, but she had never witnessed anything like the systematic precision with which the humans were dismantling the Krellian threat. Captain Bloodfang rallied his remaining forces for what he knew would be their final assault, claiming loudly over the fleet communications that humans were just another species that could bleed and die like any other. However, his own warriors were beginning to desert their posts as reports filtered through the raider fleet about the impossible capabilities of the human vessels. The stories they had dismissed as mere propaganda were turning out to be conservative estimates of Deathworlder abilities. The space battle that followed would be remembered throughout galactic history as a perfect demonstration of why humans had earned their fearsome reputation across the known universe. The Terran ships absorbed punishing damage that would have crippled or destroyed vessels from any other species, yet continued fighting with undiminished effectiveness. When Krellian warships tried to retreat from the engagement, the humans pursued them with terrifying persistence that never seemed to diminish regardless of the distance involved. Admiral Kane coordinated the battle from his command ship while personally engaging multiple enemy vessels, demonstrating the tactical expertise that had made him one of the most respected military leaders in human space. His fleet moved like a single organism with a unified purpose, each ship supporting the others while maintaining pressure on different sections of the Krellian formation. The raiders found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move before they made it. Colonel Blackwater's Marines began boarding operations against disabled Krellian vessels, moving through environments that should have been instantly fatal to any organic life form. The human warriors fought in vacuum, radiation-soaked compartments, and toxic atmospheres without any apparent difficulty, treating conditions that would kill most species as minor inconveniences to be endured while completing their missions. The Krellian defenders found themselves facing enemies who simply refused to die under any circumstances. Several Krellian captains attempted to negotiate individual surrenders as their ships were overwhelmed by human boarding parties, but Admiral Kane rejected all partial capitulations and demanded that the entire Raider fleet surrender unconditionally. The human commander made it clear that he would accept nothing less than complete cessation of hostilities and the immediate release of all prisoners taken during previous Krellian raids across the sector. Ambassador Peaceweaver tried to establish communication with both sides in hopes of preventing what appeared to be the inevitable complete destruction of the Krellian fleet. She was shocked when Admiral Kane immediately agreed to her request for negotiations, offering full prisoner rights and safe passage for any raider who surrendered willingly. The humans, despite their fearsome reputation and overwhelming military advantage, seemed genuinely interested in minimizing casualties rather than simply destroying their enemies. However, Captain Bloodfang refused all offers of surrender and negotiation, knowing that his reputation and authority depended on never showing weakness in front of his subordinates. The Krellian leader had built his power base on success and brutality, and accepting defeat at the hands of any enemy would mean the end of his career and probably his life. He would rather die fighting than live with the shame of surrender to beings he had previously dismissed as mythical creatures. The battle continued with increasing desperation as more Krellian ships were disabled or destroyed by the relentless human assault. Yet Admiral Kane continued to offer surrender terms even as his forces systematically dismantled the Raider fleet. The human commander seemed to understand that his enemies were living beings with families and futures, not just obstacles to be eliminated in the course of protecting Meridian Station and its peaceful inhabitants. In a final act of desperate defiance, Captain Bloodfang ordered his surviving ships to abandon all pretense of military engagement and ram Meridian Station directly. If he could not claim victory through conventional combat, he would at least deny the humans their prize by destroying the very civilians they had come to protect. The Krellian flagship accelerated toward the research station with its remaining escort vessels, prepared to cause as much destruction as possible before being stopped. Admiral Kane saw the enemy's final gambit developing on his tactical displays, and made a decision that would become legend throughout human space and beyond. The Indomitable changed course to intercept the Krellian flagship, placing itself directly between the enemy vessel and the helpless civilian station. The human admiral's final transmission before impact was heard clearly across every communication frequency in the system, delivering a promise that would echo through galactic history. The words carried the absolute certainty of someone who had spent his entire life defending those who could not defend themselves, spoken with the calm authority that came from knowing exactly what needed to be done regardless of personal cost. Admiral Kane told Meridian Station that they were now under the protection of Earth, and that no enemy would be allowed to harm those who had called for help from the Deathworld. The collision between the two massive flagships created a spectacular explosion that was visible from every observation deck on Meridian Station, lighting up the darkness of space with brilliant fire that gradually faded to reveal the aftermath of Admiral Kane's desperate sacrifice. When the debris cloud finally cleared enough for sensors to penetrate, both the Indomitable and Captain Bloodfang's vessel were revealed to be crippled but still intact, locked together in a twisted embrace of metal and composite materials. That spoke to the incredible engineering of both civilizations. Admiral Rex Kane hung unconscious in his command chair, blood streaming from multiple wounds caused by flying debris and system overloads, but his vital signs remained strong enough to give hope to the human crews racing to provide assistance. The bridge of the Indomitable was a smoking ruin filled with sparking electronics and twisted metal, yet the ship's core systems continued to function because human engineers had learned to build everything with survival as the primary consideration, rather than convenience or comfort. Throughout the Terran fleet, damage control teams worked frantically to restore communications with their flagship while continuing to coordinate the systematic capture or destruction of the remaining Krellian vessels. The space battle was effectively over as an organized military engagement, but individual raider ships continued to fight with the desperation of cornered animals until human Boarding parties could secure their surrender or disable their weapons. Completely, Captain Razor Bloodfang had been thrown across his bridge during the collision and now lay trapped beneath a collapsed bulkhead, his scarred features twisted with pain and the bitter knowledge of absolute defeat. The Krellian raider leader had spent his entire adult life conquering weaker civilizations through superior firepower and ruthless tactics, only to discover that the humans possessed both qualities in greater measure than he had ever imagined. Possible. Dr. Dawn Lifebringer led the human medical teams that immediately began rescuing survivors from both flagships, working with the same determination to save Krellian lives as they showed when treating their own wounded personnel. The veteran combat medic had served in frontier conflicts for over 20 years and understood that the fighting was finished once enemies were no longer capable of resistance, making them patients rather than targets for elimination. Commander Tala Windheart watched from Meridian Station as human rescue shuttles moved through the debris field with precision that seemed impossible given the chaotic conditions around the collision site. The crystalline beings who lived on her station had never witnessed anything like the systematic efficiency with which the humans switched from warfare to life-saving operations, treating former enemies with the same care they provided to their own people. The remaining Krellian forces surrendered en masse when they realized that their leader's flagship had been neutralized and their fleet was completely surrounded by human warships. The raiders had built their entire culture around following the strongest leader, and with Captain Bloodfang defeated, they had no framework for continuing organized resistance against an enemy that had proven superior in every aspect of combat. Capability. Dr. Lifebringer worked alongside the medical staff from Meridian Station to treat wounded Krellians with the same professional dedication she brought to human casualties, establishing treatment priorities based on medical need rather than species or previous hostile actions. When questioned about her methods by confused station personnel, she explained that the fighting had ended and now their only concern was preserving life wherever possible. Elder Sage Truthkeeper emerged from the crowd of Krellian prisoners being processed by human marines, his ancient features marked with a mixture of fear and recognition that surprised the younger raiders around him. The oldest surviving member of the raider fleet claimed to remember warnings about the walking death from the Outer Rim, stories that had been passed down through generations of Krellian warriors as cautionary tales about enemies that should never be provoked. The elderly Krellian spoke with Admiral Kane when the human commander was finally recovered from his damaged bridge and brought to the medical facilities on Meridian Station. Both warriors were severely injured from their collision, but Kane offered something that shocked everyone present, including his own officers who had expected the traditional execution or imprisonment of defeated enemy leaders instead of punishment. Admiral Kane offered Captain Bloodfang and his surviving followers a choice between exile and service, explaining that the humans had no interest in conquest or revenge against those who chose to abandon their predatory lifestyle. The human commander seemed to understand that most Krellians had been following their violent culture rather than making personal choices. About attacking innocent civilians, Elder Truthkeeper revealed to the assembled leaders that ancient Krellian warnings had specifically cautioned against provoking the beings from the Deathworld sector, not because they were aggressive conquerors, but because they possessed an absolute commitment to protecting those who called upon them for assistance. The humans were never meant to be challenged in direct combat, but could become the galaxy's most powerful allies if approached with respect and honest intentions. Ambassador Calm Peaceweaver worked to establish formal diplomatic relations between the surviving Krellians and the various peaceful species that had been targets of raider attacks, creating a framework for rehabilitation and reintegration rather than simple punishment. The experienced diplomat recognized that lasting peace required addressing the underlying causes of conflict rather than merely eliminating immediate threats. 3 months after the battle, Meridian Station had become a symbol of hope and cooperation. Throughout the Outer Rim sectors, with species from across the galaxy sending representatives to study the human approach to conflict resolution, the Terran fleet had established a permanent patrol base in the VOS 7 system, not as occupying conquerors but as protectors committed to maintaining peace through strength and deterrence. Commander Windheart found herself composing regular reports to the Galactic Council about the remarkable transformation that had taken place in her sector since the humans arrived. The research station had expanded into a major diplomatic center where former enemies worked together on projects that benefited all participating civilizations, proving that cooperation was possible even between species with vastly different cultural backgrounds. Captain Bloodfang, now living in exile on a remote colony world, spent his remaining years warning other raider clans about the futility of challenging human-protected territories. His message was simple and direct, advising potential aggressors to avoid any system under Terran guardianship because the humans fought with a determination that made victory impossible for those who threatened innocent lives. The former raider Captain explained to anyone who would listen that humans did not fight merely to win battles or claim territory, but approached every conflict as if the survival of everything they cared about depended on their success. This fundamental difference in motivation made them nearly impossible to defeat, because they would continue fighting long after other species would have accepted reasonable surrender terms. Elder Truthkeeper established a new school for young Krellians who wanted to learn peaceful alternatives to their traditional warrior culture, teaching them that true strength came from protecting others rather than conquering them. The ancient warrior had finally found a purpose that honored his people's fighting spirit while channeling it toward constructive rather than destructive goals. Admiral Kane recovered from his injuries and returned to active duty, continuing to patrol the frontier sectors where peaceful civilizations remained vulnerable to attack from various predatory species. The human commander carried with him the gratitude of thousands of beings who owed their lives to his willingness to sacrifice everything in defense of strangers who had simply asked for help. The story of Meridian Station spread throughout the galaxy as proof that the humans meant exactly what they said when they promised to protect those who could not protect themselves. The Deathworlders had made a commitment that transcended political boundaries or species differences, offering their strength to anyone who called upon them in genuine need of assistance against those who would do them harm. Commander Windheart's final report to the Galactic Council contained a warning that would be remembered for generations to come, serving notice to all potential aggressors that the age of unopposed predation against peaceful civilizations had ended forever. The humans had proven that they would travel any distance and face any odds to honor their promises, and they always kept their word when innocent lives were at stake.